Hey everyone, welcome to the second episode of Monday through Friday, Cellular Agriculture for a Pandemic-Free Future. My name is George Ortega and it is 4:11 p.m. on Wednesday, July 8th. Happens to be my mom's birthday. She died, I think, in 2002. May she be well in heaven. I want to actually start this episode off religiously. Again, I tend to be religious. 80 to 90% of you out there either believe in God or higher power. So this is important because religion, to a great extent, is about virtue. It's about pleasing God. It's about doing what's right, about compassion. And so, the reason I'm starting off with religion is because, part of what I'm going to be doing is accusing you of being extremely evil, and that's not something that I can do very easily because I like people and I like to help people. The reason I'm doing this show is because I see that civilization is in trouble and I'm trying to help however I can. Back in 2003, I actually, on the same White Plains Community Media television station, premiered a television series, 138 episodes, called The Happiness Show. You see a sign I used behind me as a prop for the set. And it was about making people happier, helping people become happier. So let me explain this evil in a bit more detail, then we'll go through other stuff. I'm not a fundamentalist, literalist in terms of the Bible. I believe that the known universe that we're familiar with is 13.8 billion years old, like science says. I don't believe there was a Garden of Eden and Adam and Eve. I believe in evolution. But the Bible can be instructive, through metaphor. For example, not many people know that that before the flood, remember Noah and the flood, like God decides that everybody's so evil, everybody had just descended so much that he decides to just like flood the entire world and just start off with Noah and his family and just repopulate the world. What most people don't know is that before the flood, I think it's called antediluvian, if I'm not mistaken. I don't know. Before the flood, God allowed people, God commanded. Before the flood, people were vegan, Basically, nobody ate, according to the Bible, of course, nobody ate meat. Everybody was vegan. And then God decided that humanity had fallen so much from grace that after the flood, he allowed people to start eating flesh, animals. And, but here's something that that most people don't think enough about. One of the reasons people don't feel as guilty as you should for eating these animals in these conditions. I'm not saying like 200-300 years ago, when eating meat was absolutely necessary to one's survival, that one should have felt guilty for that. But in today's world, where people eat meat that comes from animals that are tortured so horribly, treated so horribly, over 70,000 billion of them a year. It's something you should understand your complicity in. And like, what people don't understand is like, people defend themselves by saying, well, God allows us to eat animals. Eating animals is not prohibited, anymore. But that's not the point. The point isn't, yes, God allows you to eat animals, but God does not allow you to abuse and be cruel to animals and pay people to literally torture them. You know, if you know what goes on in factory farms, you know that these animals live horrific lives. How horrible is this? You know, you'd be less evil if you owned a slave than the way you treat animals. You know, and if you had a choice between being a slave or being in the Holocaust, these are the two most horrible things that I can think of that happened to people. If they were giving you a choice between the three, you would choose, you know, to either be a slave or be in the Holocaust than be one of these animals in these farms, probably. You know, that, and so you understand how horrible these conditions are. So, all right, so basically I'm saying this because, yes, what you're doing is evil, but you have to understand I'm not a conventional, I'm Jewish actually, you know, I'm not conventional in my beliefs though. Back at the time of the Common Era, when the Common Era began, when Jesus was around, there were three main Jewish sects, denominations. There were the Pharisees, the Sadducees, and the Essenes. Now the Essenes were by far the smallest of the three sects, but according to Josephus, a famous Jewish historian, they were by far the most pious. And they, I believe, incidentally, were vegan. But one of their beliefs that I hold is that you know, there were three beliefs. You know, one belief, the Pharisees, the Sadducees believe that we have complete free will in everything. Everything we do is up to us. The Pharisees had the belief that we have a free will to do what we want only in moral matters, in the matters of deciding right and wrong. Everything else is fated, is up to God, you know, with his sovereignty. And the Essenes believe that because God is sovereign, because God is all-powerful, omnipotent, the creator, all-knowing, because God is everything, God controls everything. And that's the view I hold. And incidentally, there are four top scientists in the world, that modern scientists that you know, no other scientists compare to them, are not in their league. There are Einstein, Freud, Darwin, and Newton, Isaac Newton. And all four of them, coming from the three different scientific disciplines of physics, biology, and psychology, all four of them refuted free will. They didn't believe it. They understand that free will is we don't have it. So in other words, like, the reason I'm saying this, like when I tell you this is evil, that what you're doing is really, really evil, and that you're inviting future pandemics, and your evil is responsible for this one, you know, you should understand that I'm saying this from that perspective, that I don't blame you to any degree. It's not your fault. God made you this way. You know, if you want to blame someone, you'd have to blame God. I try not to blame God. I try to tell myself, well, I'm not intelligent enough, nor do I have enough information to judge, you know, the creator of the universe, you know, to judge God. So, but again, like, so when I tell you that you're being really evil, understand it from that perspective. I'm not asking you to feel guilty about your evil, to hold yourself fundamentally responsible. And naturally, you could see how that makes it easier for me to tell you what I feel you need to know for your own benefit, for the benefit of your children and grandchildren and future generations. Okay, so now if you believe that Darwin and Freud and Einstein and Newton are wrong, if you believe in free will, well then yes, I guess you'd want to feel really guilty and really bad about this, but maybe that, you know, that's what you need to awaken your conscience. So I'm starting in that way just so you understand my perspective. So let's move on to the rest of the show. Now this series, this information, this message that I'm telling you in about like 10 different steps, there's about 4 or 5 components to it. Is so important that I will be, you know, every Monday through Friday going over the information over and over and over until you get it. You know, it's something that you have to overcome your denial of what you're doing in order to see what you're doing objectively, to understand how wrong it is, and to understand that if you believe in God or a higher power and in justice, divine justice, and this idea of karma, what goes around comes around. If you believe there is justice and mercy, then you'll understand that this coronavirus is punishment for what you're doing. I don't hold everybody complicit in this. There are about here in, I think in the United States, there are 2% of us, 3% perhaps, who are vegan. I'm a vegan. I've been a vegan for over 15 years. I don't blame us because we're not part of the problem. You know, many of us are trying to solve the problem. But, you know, if you believe in free will, you're probably in denial, you know, of what you're doing because it is so horrible, because you blame yourself. And so anyway, so like, yeah, this is like, you know, the only way we're going to get through this is if you know, I mean, all right, let's say you don't buy any of this justice, morality, you know, this divine judgment perspective. It's not that this series doesn't have any relevance to you. Let's say you're an atheist. No, it has a lot of relevance, because like, aside from all that, aside from the entire aspect of evil, which I'm going to keep stressing because 80–90% of you do have this perspective, at least to a certain extent. But even if you didn't, you have to understand that what you're doing, paying people to farm animals in these factory farms, 70 billion a year, torturing, this is what's causing these pandemics. You know, these pandemics don't just happen in factory farms, they happen in small farms also. The 1918 Spanish flu is a perfect example. It killed perhaps 50 million people. All right, so anyway, so I'm gonna, again, repeat this information over and over every Monday through Friday until you get it, until I see evidence that basically the message behind this is that the way to solve this problem, since like I don't believe very many of you are gonna go vegan. So I believe that we need another alternative. Unfortunately, you know, there's this expression that God closes a door and opens a window. So like, yes, God apparently seems to be telling us, hey, enough is enough with abusing and torturing animals. But at the same time, God is providing an opportunity to eat as much meat, dairy, and eggs as we want, in a way that is not only cruelty-free, that doesn't involve any animal cruelty, but it's actually healthier for us. You know, for example, the #1 cause of death in the United States is heart disease. The #1 cause of heart disease is meat consumption. That's not a coincidence. It's not just a coincidence. The meat we eat, because it comes from animal, often it contains fecal matter. It contains microbes like salmonella and E. coli. You know, it's just like, and it contains harmful ingredients like cholesterol. So like this new cellular agriculture industry that God just presented to us in 2013 when Mark Post presented his proof of concept in London, introducing this technology to the world. This new technology has to grow meat. It's essentially about growing the meat in labs, taking a cell and making it reproduce in a lab. And those conditions have to be completely sterile for it to work. You know, you can't introduce microbes into the process and have it work. So that's why this process would lead to a relatively, perhaps not completely, but relatively enough pandemic-free future for us. It's the best and the only reasonable way we have of being safe from pandemics and of protecting also our economy, you know, our way of life, our prosperity. So, so I'll know my message has gotten through when the United States government, you know, who's just spent almost $4 trillion on addressing the economic collapse that has been caused by this, you know, closing of society, of the economy through this pandemic, that after spending $4 trillion to fix that, that they have the foresight, the judgment, the prudence to spend $50 billion on this new industry, because like, if they don't, at the current rate of funding for this brand new industry, it may take 10, 15 years for these products to come to market at competitive prices in your supermarket, so you can eat them and so we can have a pandemic-free world. But if we spend $50 billion, just recruit an army of researchers, give them all the resources they need, the machinery, the lab equipment, just really ramp up this research and development that's needed to scale up the technology so we can sell these, you know, manufacture and sell these products at a competitive price. I lost my train of thought, but anyway, that's when I'll know when the message has gone through, when we're wise enough to spend that money to do that research to get these products to market. All right, so got about 11 minutes. We're not going to go through everything today, because I thought it was important to go over this morality and this religious perspective and the free will perspective. But what I did earlier today, again, you hear people say that this pandemic is an 100-year event, you know, because the Spanish flu of 1918 was 102 years ago. It actually lasted until 1920, so I guess it isn't a 100-year event, literally, you know, to the year. But what I did earlier today is, like, I don't know if you can see this. I made I don't know if you can see this yet. A graph. I went to the wiki page on list of epidemics throughout history, and yeah, well, I think what I'm going to do is basically to demonstrate that this is not a 100-year event. I want to go through some of this, and like first, you know, and I just like those. They had all different kinds of epidemics, and some of them are insect borne, and so I excluded those. You know, I focused just on the ones that are transmitted from animals to humans, because this is why we're going through this. You know, in other words, like the sanitary conditions in these factory farms are so beyond horrible that they are perfect breeding grounds for pandemics. And actually, I don't think I'm going to go through this today because it's a bit too complicated. I'm just like going to make a few points today and then go over it in more detail once I get a bit more organized. But anyway, the first influenza that's recorded was back in 1200 before the Common Era, okay? And then between 165 and 180 of the Common Era, AD, if you're Christian, there was what they think was a smallpox epidemic. And I guess it was a pandemic back then. The animal source was probably a rodent. They're just guessing on this. And it killed between 5 to 10 million people. Okay, then 70 years later, they had another smallpox pandemic that killed 1 million people. Then the big one, you know, the big one was between 541 and 42 of the Common Era. It was the bubonic plague, which was a bacteria. You know, all these other, you know, pandemics, epidemics are virus caused. And like, you know, factory farms are breeding grounds for both bacteria and virus-borne contagious diseases. You need to understand that. So anyway, like the bubonic plague came from rodents, and cats carry it, and it killed about 25 to 100 million people back then, which was about 40 to 50% of the European population. It was basically limited to Europe. Again, you have a lot of different pandemics. You have, for example, the, let's see, measles. The first outbreak of measles that's recorded was 1592 to 96, and that came from cattle. See, all these pandemics came from the domestication of animals. Before we farmed animals, there were no pandemics because there was no mechanism for this transmission. You know, that's important to understand. So like, all right, in 1648, there was yellow fever, which came from a monkey. Just to like, all right, the big one was 1918 to 1920, Spanish flu. It was influenza A subtype H1N1. That's important because we have different variations now, this influenza type A, which I'll go into. And that you know, came from a pig or a bird, they're not sure. But that killed between 17 million and 100 million people, probably more, you know, easily more than World War II. The war killed. The standard number is about 50 million it killed. So that's 1918. So like, you know, all right, so, all right, 1929-30, coinciding with the depression they had parrot fever, which came as various birds, not just parrots. And that didn't kill that many people. That just killed over 100. But you know, some of these epidemics don't reach they're just outbreaks. They don't reach the status of an epidemic or a pandemic. A pandemic is when it's so contagious that, you know, throughout the world, you know, people get it and die and all. So anyway, so like just moving to 1981, this pandemic is still active. It's called HIV/AIDS. And it is said to have come from a chimpanzee, okay? And it's already killed between 23 and 48 million people. It's still killing people. But the other point I want to make is that since then, again, that's 1981, well, go 20 years after that, and that's when things really scale up in terms of like brand new diseases. 2002, 2004, there was SARS, or the severe acute respiratory syndrome. It was a coronavirus. It's a variation of what we're experiencing now. It came from exotic animals, and they were lucky. It only killed 774 people. Let's go to 2009, 2010, the swine flu, influenza, or that came from pigs. I'm getting into too much detail. So like basically what I'm trying to say is like between 2000 and the present, you've got Ebola, Rift Valley fever, hepatitis B, MERS, Middle East respiratory syndrome, avian flu, hepatitis E, hepatitis A, Nipah virus. These are all new diseases that, you know, these are not, they didn't have these 100 years ago. They didn't have these, you know, 50 years ago. These are new diseases that come from so much factory farming. And then how do they spread? You know, they spread because there's so many people on the planet and people travel on airplanes. Fortunately, a lot of these haven't spread all that much, but they could. And we're seeing that they could now with this coronavirus, this COVID-19. So now we're at COVID-19, 2019 to the present. It's the COVID-19 virus. It's called, the type of virus is called COVID-19, you know, / SARS-CoV-2. And it's transmitted from either wildlife, like a bat, directly to a human, or more likely wildlife, like a bat, to an animal, like a civet, you know, the one of these animals that they raise, you know, these wild animals they raise for whatever, and to a human. So like, and you know, so far, COVID-19 has killed 546,000 people, and you know, everybody understands what else the harm it's done. So like, this is why it's so important to understand that no, this is not a 100-year event. Again, like, it's not just that these pandemics, these epidemics are so much more contagious because so many more people travel. And I've got some information on that. I'll get more detailed information in a future episode. But it's also because of deforestation. In other words, like, bats a lot of times live in forests. When we cut down the forests and and civilize those areas, use them for us, well, that brings these wild animals into closer contact with us. Okay, and the third major factor behind this really massive, you know, taking off of these infectious diseases is factory farming. Even as far back as 100, 150 years ago, we didn't have this kind of risk that we have now, because we didn't really have this kind of factory farming. It's not, I'm not saying that that family farming is completely safe either. You know, we're going to have to, like, basically, if we really want to be safe and prudent and good to our kids, grandkids, to the future, we need to stop all farming of animals. So, and again, the way to do this, I've got about a minute left. The way to do this is to grow our meat and dairy and eggs in labs. And, you know, we need research funding. The researchers need funding. You know, they're right now, altogether, they probably have about $200 million invested in this, when it really should be like 50 million. All right, so anyway, I didn't get through much of the material today, which is fine, but I think I covered some important points. And I'll cover this again tomorrow. Hopefully tomorrow I'll have some information on how much more air travel there is today, because that's what happens. In other words, like, we can't prepare for these new pandemics through contact tracing and testing and all, because they spread too fast. You know, but by the time they're here, they're all over the place. And as we see, it's difficult to contain. All right, I'm running out of time. So, you know, hope you're having a good evening, and I'll see you again tomorrow. Okay, take care.